Stomatis moritis wakes up every morning on a hillside in Ikaria, Greece, without an alarm. He was 102 years old. He walks, slowly, deliberately, down to his vineyard, where he tends the same vines he planted when he was a young man. He doesn't check a phone. He doesn't have a schedule before noon. He doesn't rush. This is not retirement. This is not medication. This is Tuesday. Now think about where Stomatis was in 1976. He was living in the United States, working as a house painter. He was 66 years old, and his American doctors had just given him 6 to 9 months to live. Terminal lung cancer. They offered treatment. He declined. He decided to go back to Ikaria to be buried with his ancestors. Except he didn't die. He started tending the vineyard again. He started resting in the afternoons. He stopped wearing a watch, and instead of dying, he lived for 36 more years, cancer-free, on a tiny Greek island where nearly 1 in 3 people makes it past 90. When journalists found him decades later, they asked him how he had survived. He smiled and said, "I just forgot to die." That answer sounds like a joke. It's not, and by the end of this video, I'll show you exactly what Stomatis was actually doing, a specific daily practice that took researchers years to identify, that most Western longevity experts never mention, and that costs you nothing to start today. The Ikaria study, conducted by the University of Athens Medical School, led by Dr. Christina Chrysohou, with 1,411 participants, confirmed something that stopped the research team cold. Compared to Western populations, Ikarians experience 50% lower rates of cardiovascular disease, 20% lower rates of cancer, and, this is the number that still surprises people, almost 0 instances of dementia in the elderly. Not reduced, almost 0. You've been told that longevity is a genetics problem, that it's a pharmaceutical problem, that it's a supplementation problem. And so the Western world spends $240 billion every year treating cardiovascular disease alone with a cabinet full of pills. And on a mountainous Greek island, people forget to die. There is something happening here that the money cannot explain. And today, I'm going to show you exactly what it is. The answer lives in 3 interlocking systems. The first is a specific plant that Ikarians have been drinking daily for centuries. One that acts on your blood pressure in a way that researchers at Otto von Guericke University in Germany only recently confirmed at the molecular level. The second is what that plant is paired with, and why the combination matters more than either element alone. And the third is the practice Stomatis described without naming it, the one that no supplement can replicate, the one I'll tell you about at the end. Let's start with what's in the cup. Every afternoon, across Ikaria, the same ritual plays out in kitchens and on terraces overlooking the Aegean. Someone puts a small pot of water on the stove. They drop in a handful of dried stems and flowers, scraggly looking, nothing impressive. They let it simmer for 5 minutes, then steep for 3 more. They pour it through a strainer, stir in a spoonful of raw pine or thyme honey, and they sit down. That plant is Greek mountain tea, Sideritis in botanical terms, called Tsai Tuvunu on the island. It is not a trendy supplement. There is no brand behind it. A large bag of organic dried Sideritis costs somewhere between $10 and $15 and lasts for weeks. The daily cost works out to roughly $3 a week. Now here's the part that surprised even the researchers. When the team at Otto von Guericke University analyzed Sideritis extracts for the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease in 2018, they weren't looking at blood pressure at all. They were studying dementia. What they found was that the flavonoids and polyphenols in this tea, specifically chlorogenic acid, significantly reduced the buildup of amyloid beta plaques in brain tissue, the same plaques that cause Alzheimer's disease, in the same elderly population that, on Ikaria, almost never develops it. But the cardiovascular mechanism is equally precise. Sideritis acts as a mild, natural diuretic. It signals the kidneys to flush excess sodium and fluid from the bloodstream. Lower fluid volume means lower pressure on arterial walls, which means fewer of the microtears that lead to plaque buildup, stiffening, and eventually a cardiac event. It is, in the most direct biological sense, a cardiovascular pressure valve, grown on a hillside, brewed in a pot, consumed daily for centuries before anyone had the science to explain why it worked. The Archives of Internal Medicine published a study in 2012 examining antioxidant and antimicrobial properties across Sideritis species. The finding was that these compounds protect cellular DNA from oxidative stress, the same oxidative stress that accelerates aging at the cellular level and underlies most chronic disease. Think for a moment about the last time you had a quiet cup of something warm, not while working, not while scrolling, just sitting, letting your blood pressure drop. When did that last happen? That's what Ikarians do every single day. The practical side is simpler than it sounds. You can find organic Sideritis on Amazon or at any Greek or Mediterranean grocery. Look for whole dried stems and flowers, not processed tea bags. Bring 1.5 cups of filtered water to a gentle boil. Add 2 or 3 sprigs. Reduce the heat and let it simmer for 5 minutes. Remove it from the heat. Let it steep for 3 more minutes. Then strain and add a teaspoon of raw honey while it's still warm. That's it. 1 cup every afternoon. The honey matters. Raw, local honey carries its own polyphenol load, and the Ikarians have been using it this way for as long as anyone can remember. This is only part of what's happening on the island. The tea explains a significant portion of the cardiovascular and cognitive advantage. But alone, it explains maybe half of what the Ikaria study actually found. The second layer is something that most people in the West have a complicated relationship with. It's not a food, it's a behavior, and in Ikaria, it is not optional. Between 2 and 5 in the afternoon, the island stops, shops close, phones go unanswered, people go home. This is the Messimeriano, the midday rest, and it is not casual or polite, it is structural. The entire social architecture of the village is built around it. When the researchers at the Harvard School of Public Health and the University of Athens analyzed data from 23,681 Greek adults published in the Archives of Internal Medicine in 2007, they found that taking a regular midday nap of at least 30 minutes reduces overall coronary mortality by 37%. 37%. That is not a subtle effect. That is the difference between living into your 80s and living into your 90s. For comparison, a leading statin drug taken daily reduces cardiovascular mortality by roughly 25 to 35%, and it costs the global market over $30 billion a year. A nap reduces it by 37 and costs nothing. But a more recent finding deepened this significantly. A 2019 study published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology found that a midday nap lowers blood pressure by an average of 5 millimeters of mercury. That is the equivalent effect of taking a low-dose daily antihypertensive medication. The biology here is not mystical. During deep rest, the body leaves the sympathetic nervous system state, the stress response that keeps blood pressure elevated, and enters a parasympathetic state where the heart rate drops, the vessels dilate, and the entire cardiovascular system gets a daily restoration window. Ikarians are not napping because they're lazy. They're napping because their culture has preserved, entirely by tradition, a biological intervention that Western pharmacology charges billions to approximate. The Messimeriano pairs with the mountain tea in a way that compounds both effects. The tea's diuretic and antioxidant action reduces baseline pressure. The rest drops pressure further, twice a day, once at midday and again at night. The heart never runs at full pressure for 16 hours straight, the way it does in most Western adults. What we do in the West instead, we take meetings at 2 p.m., we drink a second coffee, we push through. We are quietly proud of never stopping. The average American adult takes no planned rest in the middle of the day. Heart disease remains the leading cause of death in the U.S. 1 in every 5 deaths, nearly 700,000 people a year. We spend $240 billion treating it with medications that cost, on a per-person basis, more in a single month than an Ikarian spends on mountain tea in a year. They had a pharmacy in their kitchen garden, not a cabinet full of capsules. And now, the third thing, the one I promised you in the first 2 minutes, the one Stamatis described without naming it, when he said he forgot to die. In 2008, a massive trial called the SELECT study, funded with serious money, peer-reviewed, published, attempted to do exactly what the supplement industry always promises: isolate the antioxidants that extended life in whole food populations and put them in a pill. They chose vitamin E and selenium. The trial ran for years. The result was not neutral. The group taking vitamin E had a 17% higher rate of prostate cancer than the control group. The intervention made outcomes worse. This is what happens when you strip a practice down to a single molecule and remove all the context that made it work. The context is the point. When the University of Athens researchers were compiling the data from the Ikaria study, they included a variable that almost got cut from the analysis. It didn't fit neatly into standard categories. It was difficult to quantify. The research coordinator nearly recommended dropping it before the final review, but they kept it in. The variable was this: Ikarians do not experience time the way Western populations do. They don't wear watches with any regularity. They don't schedule life in tight intervals. They don't have the phrase, "I'm running late," as a constant psychological backdrop. There is a word in Greek, akronia, that doesn't translate cleanly into English. It means something close to timelessness. The absence of time urgency as a governing principle of daily life. What the researchers found, when they ran the numbers, was that this relationship with time, specifically the absence of chronic time pressure, was among the strongest predictors of cardiovascular health in the entire dataset. More than any single food, more predictive than the tea, more predictive than the nap taken in isolation, because the practice of time structured everything else. The biology behind this is the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. When humans perceive time scarcity, the brain triggers a low-grade stress response. Cortisol rises, adrenaline trickles, blood pressure climbs. Most Western adults live in this state not occasionally but continuously, from the moment the alarm fires at 6 a.m. until they collapse at midnight. The cumulative cardiovascular load of that chronic stress is significant and largely unmeasured because it doesn't show up in a cholesterol panel. What Stamatis was doing when he stopped wearing a watch and started tending his vineyard without a schedule, he was down-regulating his HPA axis, permanently, structurally, every day. The mountain tea dropped his blood pressure chemically, the Mesomeriano dropped it physically, and the relationship with time kept it from climbing back between those two windows. 3 interlocking pressure valves, each one reinforcing the others. This isn't unique to Ikaria. In Nicoya, Costa Rica, they call it plan de vida, a sense of purpose so rooted that the day's tasks feel meaningful rather than urgent. In Okinawa, they describe their approach to time as nankuru naisa, roughly, it will work out as it should. The longest-lived populations on Earth have, independently and across completely different cultures, arrived at the same conclusion about time, that treating it like a scarce resource is a form of chronic self-harm. This is not destiny, this is practice. And here is where Stamatis comes back into the picture. When he returned to Ikaria in 1976, he didn't do anything heroic. He drank his tea. He rested in the afternoons. He stopped checking the time. He worked in his vineyard at the pace the vineyard required. He didn't cure his cancer with a protocol. He removed the conditions that were accelerating his death. And then he lived for 36 more years. In your first week of the mountain tea, you'll likely notice something quiet, a slight softening in how the afternoons feel. Digestion may improve. Some people notice better sleep within days. By the end of the first month, the diuretic effect on blood pressure is measurable at home. By 90 days, it's worth asking your doctor for a high-sensitivity C-reactive protein test, HSCRP, which measures systemic inflammation. That is where you will see the most compelling evidence of what has shifted. By 6 months, the changes in how you experience and move through time are no longer the result of trying. They become the default. Tonight, not this weekend, not when things slow down. Tonight, find 15 minutes where you owe no one anything. No task, no screen, no optimized outcome. Put water on the stove, drop in a sprig of something, and sit. That is tier 1, day 1. And here's the question I want you to answer in the comments. When was the last time you had a genuinely unhurried afternoon? Not a sick day, not a holiday. A regular afternoon where no one needed you and you didn't need anywhere to be. I read every single comment, and your answer is going to shape where we go next. If this is the depth you want every week, every protocol sourced, every study named, subscribe. We go this deep into every blue zone, every system, every week. Because the lesson Stamatis left behind isn't that Ikaria is special. It's that time is not actually running out. That belief is making you sick, and it can be unlearned.